It's now time to enter our panel discussion regarding digital transformation and flexibility to achieve e-commerce success. Our guest panelists are Nabil Malouli, Vice President Global E-commerce at DHL, Richard MacLaren, Senior Vice President, Hellmann Worldwide Logistics, and Guy Courtin, Head of Global Alliances, Six River Systems. Hey guys, how are you?
Very good.
Hi Dan, hi everybody.
Hey Dan, how are you?
Excellent, excellent. Nabil, the last time we had you on here, you were talking about the possibility of a DHL Dropbox downstairs in your foyer. Did that ever happen?
What did you say? A Dropbox?
Yeah, a DHL Dropbox. You were so upset about those FedEx Dropboxes all over the place.
I don't remember that story, but maybe I just my mind is missing sometimes.
No worries, my friend, no worries, but I hope it happened for you. So Sharon, I guess we'll open up and you'll ask the first question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Nabil. I'm really happy to have you here. I'm a follower of your work, and I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot from you today. So we are going to start with the first question. How this boom in e-commerce has forced supply chains to dynamize their operations to be able to meet the changing demands?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for the event and for having me. It's great to be here, and it's great to see Guy and to share the panel here with distinguished other peers in the industry. So in relation to the question about e-commerce boom and how it has forced supply chain to dynamize their operations, I think it's it's amazing what we saw in the last 12 months in one part. But at the same time, for the people that were working in e-commerce, we were expecting this to happen. I think what we didn't know is how fast it will happen and how quick some of the organization will have to change. But for people that have been working in the space, there are no big surprise as to what is happening now. I think it's just really the pace of the change that we see has been the biggest topic, right? Is if you look, there was a very interesting report from McKinsey that talked about 10 years of penetration in the equivalent of 3 months. There was another one around 95% of the companies had to change their strategy of supply chain, which is a transport intelligence report in relation to e-commerce. So I think what we really saw is e-commerce has been on the news and has been on the top of the agendas for many companies for many years. But there's a difference when you say, well, it's an important topic and when it becomes the top priority. And I think what we really saw was, number one, a lot of the Fortune 500s made it their number one priority. So it moved from something important to something that was the most important. And obviously that has triggered a lot of dynamic around how companies are driving their strategies. I mean, just last week, there was an important announcement from Adidas that also announced that they will have 50% of their volume, which would be direct to consumer by 2025, right? And Nike did the similar announcement a couple of months ago. So you start to see companies really changing their entire model, reducing some of their channels and really going all in this space. And I think for us in this industry, it's an amazing opportunity because even if e-commerce is nothing new, we are just at the beginning. And even if you look at penetration, even in mature markets, we're still talking about 17, 20, 25, 30% of penetration, which means, now it's not really a crazy thought to say, well, that number could reach 80%, by 2030, right? If some of the large organizations are already seeing that accelerated growth. And so for us in the logistic industry, what does it bring? It brings more need for transformation, bigger requests in terms of how fast companies have to be, how technologically advanced they have to be, how agile they have to be. And that's really an opportunity for us, people working in the industry, to really create the next wave of businesses, create the next wave of change, and also create the next wave of a customer experience. So, I think I'm obviously super excited about the topic, and I think it's something that we will see, being on the top of the agenda for the next decade at least, I think.
That is great. What do you guys think, Guy and Richard?
Yeah, if I can, I mean, I think everything that Nabil said is spot on. I think what's really interesting is the accelerated growth. I think most of us had known that this was coming, just how fast it came. I think I would push us all to sort of think about e-commerce a little differently as well. And I think Nabil kind of touched upon it, but I would like to expand on is to say, I think the whole concept of e-commerce maybe itself might be a little bit old and passé. What do I mean by that? I started out my career way back in the day at Forrester Research in the late 90s, when we all know that was when e-commerce really became what it is, right? Amazon was a young company. The whole internet was coming together. And the whole notion then about e-commerce was what? Was being able to transact through, at the time, your desktop, right? Through this thing called the internet. Well, fast forward to today, that notion of interacting through a digital means is something that we do naturally through our phones or laptops or tablets, what have you. But what's really happening is how we fulfill, right? How we fulfill has drastically changed. How we purchase, we already know how to do that. I know how to buy something on my phone. How do I fulfill? And Nabil mentioned it, talking about some of these ways we fulfill. And we were joking about, having a Dropbox down in Nabil's office, but I think that really sort of shows that we have to change the way we think about commerce, not necessarily about how we transact, but how we get orders fulfilled. So not just how we got things delivered to our home, but now you look at, interview with Lowe's CEO last year who said, BOPAC, buy online, pick up at curb, was on their list to do, but all of a sudden COVID hit, and to Nabil's point, that accelerated. All of a sudden it became not a nice to have, but a need to have. So all of a sudden now the way we fulfilled those orders became something different. Instead of putting in a box, shipping it to you, I brought it to your car when you came to the curb, right? So I think we have to think about what are the fulfillment methods we are going to be using to meet the customer need, knowing that the customer already is very comfortable buying and transacting in multiple digital means. How do we fulfill those orders?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Richard.
No, I was just gonna build on that as well. I mean, I think Nabil and Guy have gone through most of this, but really, Nabil talked about the acceleration that's happened in the last particularly through COVID. We've seen that transformation, almost 7 years of transformation in a space of 3 months. But I mean, three things that just taking a different angle. We've talked about the technology, but also like in terms of fulfillment, what we've seen as well is that more and more larger fulfillment centers are now sort of being sourced to be able to meet this demand. So even just 4 years ago, we had warehouses that relatively large, but now they're going for significant size, and 22 feet high, moving to 28 to 33 and now 40, so they can build in that growth through mezzanines. And then one of the topics that was picked up earlier was returns, and really what's come front of mind really is returns through through this massive increase, how to be able to deal with that. So that's another area where consumer demand, particularly in the last year, has made a big difference. Operationally, we've had to make some big changes in terms of being able to respond to that return surge.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Richard, this next question is for you. What did your here you go. What did your company do to adapt in this era of e-commerce? That's a great question, especially for a logistics company. And we're listening.
Especially for indeed. So I mean, I think first off, because we didn't get a chance, so I think it's really great that you guys are hosting this. I think it's such a topical area. You get so many questions asked on e-commerce. In my own mind, this is probably the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and I know it's been accelerated through through COVID. It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're manufacturing, small business, large business, everything is changed through that. I mean, I'm fortunate that most recently I've worked for two great organizations. Both of them have been really focused on e-com. I think Guy mentioned before, but I started getting involved in my previous organization in the sort of early 2000s and mid 2000s, helping companies to actually set up small ones, being able to try and get dip their toes in e-commerce. I moved out, as you can probably tell from my New Jersey accent, but I moved out to to the US about 16 years ago and started helping a lot of global companies get set up through my organization there. And we took a chance, and some of them, they were like 3,000 to 4,000 square feet, and now some of them are at 1 million square feet, really. So we took a consultative approach to to helping those organizations in the early years when it was a big challenge. At Hellmann, where I'm now, they've been investing pretty much for over 15 years in developing different types of technology. So anything from like order management systems, so their own proprietary systems, sort of like financial and payment systems, customers care systems, and also kind of best of breeds as well. So allowing sort of using the latest technologies and automation in some of the fulfillment centers. But coming back to to your question, what we've really tried to focus is we're fortunate, we have a number of great customers across the globe, and one of the biggest things they've been asking is to help them get into different markets and different regions. So we've had a big focus on cross-border, getting them being able to even just fulfill from their own region into, say, like the US, or if they want to take it a further step, we'll set them up with like international return centers. If they want to go to a further step, we'll help them with setting up or managing their e-fulfillment and the returns and such. I mean, an interesting fact is even just next year, 3 billion people will start to have access to internet. So you've got these massive markets that are opening up around the world. So we've tried to really focus on making it very sort of seamless, make it simple, make it very sort of approachable, and then help them through that journey to be able to take advantage of all the opportunities in all the different markets. So that's what we've tried to do. We've got all the main components, but we've tried to really try and facilitate that opportunity to take advantage of these different markets for them to to grow their revenues.
It certainly helped that you had the infrastructure 15 years ago.
Yes, it does. It does.
Guy, you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think one of the things we had to focus too on when especially what Richard was talking about through the infrastructure, what you just mentioned, I think is the aspect of the people too, right? And I think when you're preparing for e-commerce, you're preparing your fulfillment network, if you will, to meet this demand. A lot of it also still involves the people, right? And obviously I work for an automation company, so we are very heavy in automation, but we also recognize that the automation and the people really go hand in hand. I think when you're preparing yourself to meet this new demand, this new way of fulfilling, as we talked about, you have to look at the different aspects that go into it. And I think part of it, or the big part of it, is the people and the change management that comes around it. One of the things that was really interesting, and I was on a webinar yesterday, and we were talking about the same thing, is now when we do fulfillment, right? When I ship that product out and it's going to Sharon, it's going to Dan, one's going to Nabil, one's going to Richard, right? Those are the last time in some degree that someone is touching that item before it gets to the customer. So how do I ensure that the labor, the people that are touching, interfacing, packing, shipping, delivering the item carry also some of the brand weight that is associated with it? And I think that's something in e-commerce that we didn't realize in the beginning. I thought we felt it was just, just a pass through, make it very efficient, cost effective, move product through. Now to get ready for e-commerce, you really had to think about the fact that I might never see my customer. My customer might interact with me entirely digitally, but when I put that product in that box, how do I do it? Or how do I ensure that it's done in such a way that it reflects properly upon me and my brand?
Interesting thoughts, definitely. And how about you, Nabil? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I think in relation to this, we've been working in the topic of e-commerce for more than a decade. But if we look at the last 12 months, a couple of things that we've done, I think, which are really related to this accelerated growth. Number one, we added capacity, so delivery capacity as well as air capacity. So we bought new aircrafts. We've increased capacity in the network that we manage. The second thing we did, I think, which is highly relevant, is we launched an entirely new service in Europe, which is a fully flexible fulfillment network for companies that do not want to invest and that are looking for a full turnkey solution to be able to fulfill orders across Europe and the UK. I think that's also something that we thought was going to be able to help a lot of brands that are looking at shifting faster. The other thing that we did is, so we've announced last year an investment of 2 billion euros from now until 2025 around digitalization. So we've accelerated the implementation of a lot of the automation and Guy will know this from as an insider, but around the project that we work on in terms of automations. So we are accelerating our ability to execute there in that front. And I think the last thing we did, which I thought was, it's a bit of like more of a softer aspect, but very important, is I think we got a lot of our people out of their comfort zone. So we implemented businesses faster than we ever did by far in that short term. We saw customers that came and say, well, I need a site running in 45 days. Can you do it? And things that maybe we don't do traditionally at large scale. We did a couple of projects that were really, really, in our side, at least to our scale, really out of our traditional comfort zone in terms of speed to execute and implement. So I think this would be the four major things I think that we've done a bit different.
Mm-hmm. So the takeaway there on that question is infrastructure, getting the people with the knowledge to work it, and then getting it to the consumer as fast as possible, without touching it as so much. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that didn't mention, but it's extremely clear that the COVID situation has raised the importance of supply chain at all levels, right? From governments to institutions to everybody that had no clue about how stuff gets there. I mean, from the anecdotes of toilet papers up to the most important topics of vaccine deliveries, I think supply chain is on the top of mind for everybody because they are personally impacted, from their personal groceries to whatever happened, whatever country you're based into. So that topic being pushed to the top of the life of everybody has created a real need to look at supply chain as a critical competitive advantage for companies, right? If you look at I think this was an amazing stat to me, but Apple sold in Q2, they had their record quarters of iPhone sold with almost not a single retail location open across the globe. Mm-hmm. And that tells you that for the companies that were well prepared and the companies that were looking at this topic of supply chain being a key competitive advantage and that has worked and invested through time on this, they were not highly impacted, right? I mean, they managed to go through the transformation pretty fast, and that gives you, a huge competitive advantage and position you better than anybody else. So I think that's extremely important as well.
Well, yeah, the supply chain has changed considerably because of COVID. And the fact of the matter is, if you had inventory local, you were fine. If you had the infrastructure locally or domestically, you were fine. If you were importing, you were really in a jam. And that's really what happened. And that's why I'm seeing that the e-commerce now that coming online here is really streamlining the industry. And it's a whole new ballgame. And it's just the future is e-commerce, basically, because more people, and it's sad, but more people are going to want to shop online and do it that way than they are going to be any other way.
I might interject on that point, though, just to be the contrarian on this. I think what's interesting is what will be interesting to see is as we emerge out of COVID, right, as we're getting more vaccines and we get back to, and I hate to use the term new normal, but we get back to something that's not restrictive to being in our homes. I think there is going to be a pent up demand to actually go back out and to do shopping in person. I think what's going to be interesting is what does that shopping look like? And I think what that means is if you look at trend lines before COVID, a lot of the commerce was really trending towards experiences, right? People were looking to purchase based on experiences. They're looking to go to movies or a restaurant or have adventures, air quotes here, not necessarily purchasing goods and inventory. I think as we come out of COVID, I think what happens with that? Do we go back to just pure experiential desires where that outweighs the actual physical? Is there a combination of the above? I think people are going to want to go back to stores, but the store will absolutely shift the store within that realm. And to your point, from that standpoint, Dan, you're absolutely right. I think the mentality of e-commerce is going to stay with us and is only going to keep growing. The question becomes, what does that look like from an actual fulfillment standpoint?
And along those lines, do you think warehouses have the biggest challenge due to customers that are not going directly to the stores? When you're talking about infrastructure, capacity, and technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think warehouses themselves are changing, right? And I think we're seeing that, yes, we are going to need more and more warehouses, but I think the warehouse itself is going to look very different. You're going to have they're going to have the massive warehouses Richard talked about, these huge massive DCs that are going to do massive fulfillment. You're also going to have micro fulfillment centers. You're also going to have dark stores. You're going to have a combination of the above. You're going to have more and more warehouses adding, in my opinion, value-added services. Right? Richard mentioned earlier the returns aspect, huge component of the warehouse utilization moving forward, I believe, where all of a sudden now, do I leverage the warehouse to not only send inventory out, but also bring inventory back, reprocess it, refurb it, figure out what to do with it, reduce the touch points, but make sure I leverage that inventory to maximize my use of that inventory, so to speak, the working capital. So I think the evolution of the warehouse is going to change, and the way we think of it is going to change, right? Is it a store a warehouse? Is the back room of the store a warehouse? Is a pop-up store a warehouse? Is a micro fulfillment center a warehouse, or is it a store? Can I have it hybrid? I think you're going to see a lot of that, and I think it's very exciting, because what that means is, again, it's all about driving satisfaction to us as consumers, and those, to Nabil's point, those of us in the fulfillment space that are thinking along these lines of flexibility will be able to meet those needs and be able to provide the services necessary. But it's not our grandpa's warehouse, that's for sure.
Well, along those lines, again, I have another question. Do you think that the trends we saw in response to COVID are here to stay, or will purchasing habits course correct as COVID becomes less of a concern?
I could take that one again. Yeah, I think I think we don't know, to be honest, right? And I think the problem is, I think the mentality of buying online, expecting satisfaction the way we are, that will continue. I believe, again, as I just mentioned, I think that we'll see. I believe there'll be a blip, maybe even a lot more than a blip, when we come out of this, where people will go back to stores. What was interesting is, you look at here in the United States, when restrictions were relaxed a little bit, I believe it was end of last spring, early summer, stores like Kohl's saw a massive influx of people coming in to purchase, right? They weren't expecting it. All of a sudden, people were like, hey, I'm in my house. I want to get out. I want to buy. Yes, I can buy it online, but I like to go and see and actually see other people. So I think we're going to see that. We're going to also see what I believe is a pivot, where you're going to see more purchase of things like what? Vacations, going to restaurants, movies. That discretionary money will shift a little bit back to this experiential side, which, let's face it, what are the big industries that got clobbered during COVID? The restaurant industry, airlines, hotels, right? We as consumers, we want to consume those goods. Well, instead of buying another bread maker, I'm going to go to the restaurant. So I think what will come out of COVID, we'll see that. And then a new normal, I hate the term, will establish itself, where we'll see, I think, again, stores being redefined, warehouses being redefined. We as consumers continue to have the power in driving that. And it all comes back to Nabil's point. I think it's really important, that flexible ability of fulfillment, right? Because that's how direct consumer companies, retailers, 3PLs are going to be able to meet that demand and be able to adapt to where that new normal is.
Richard, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I just look at my teenage daughters as well, and I think about, what their experiences, they're always a good guide in looking at what they do in terms of their consumer and behaviors as well. The thing that's always struck me is that, and I think we mentioned some of the earlier presentations, is how many things they will actually order the same item, because they can't. Because even though we've kind of developed, augmented reality and other, abilities to be able to try on virtually products, they'll still make these kind of multiple orders. But I also equally see them wanting to get out and actually, even though they can do it on their mobile phone or such, they want. So there's going to be this pent up with, desire to really get out, even though they can to just go and just to experience what's out there, going to shopping malls, going out to to restaurants, concerts and such, really. So I think that it's difficult to see where it'll all land, and whether there'll be that excitement like we had last year, and then it'll kind of retract. But also I think that most people's habits will probably remain as they are. I think I've seen big switches in terms of it's not so much in the US in terms of grocery stores compared to other parts of the world in UK and Europe, but more and more people are moving to just getting their groceries online. They're moving to getting a lot of other services or products online. I don't think that's going to change. So it goes back to that flexibility that we talked about. I mean, I talked about the larger warehouses, but actually in those metro areas, we want to order in the morning, and we want it same day delivery. I mean, Amazon's been pushing that for for a while, which is why they've built up such such a network. So I think this kind of this desire to get something almost on the same day as well is we're going to have to be flexible. But then how much what kind of products you're going to be able to hold at those those micro centers as well. So your inventory management systems, and being able to respond to those changes and those and those demands are going to be quite key as well. So I think we're going to see I think there's going to be an initial change in terms of just because people have been locked out for for longer, and I think there'll be then it will settle down. But I think there'll be a lot of behaviors that are modified through this will not change, and they will remain really.
It's so funny that you used your daughter as the guide for that, but it's true. they seem to show us the way. Nabil, what are your thoughts on that? I know you had some initial thoughts, but after these last few comments from our two friends here, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree that there is definitely a need for people, to reconnect, with some of the habits that they had before. I personally think that we are going to see the trend holding of COVID. I think we're going to start to see really after the vaccine, really to what level they will remain, in terms of growth. But I think we have to keep in mind something. Before COVID, e-commerce was growing at a very fast pace, particularly if you look at absolute value, since 2012. And people were not buying online because they were worried about, a disease or to get COVID or whatsoever. They were buying online because of convenience and choice. And that has not changed, right? I mean, if anything, it will be highly enhanced because last year you have many powerhouse of e-commerce, big giant that got either mega valuation, get a lot of funding, and get a lot of horsepower behind them now to be doing even more stuff than what they were doing before. And if you just look at one statistic, which I think is the most, probably the most surprising, is Amazon hired 425,000 people between March and December. It's more than 1,500 people per day. And most of the people are either delivery or warehouse employees, right? So when you start to look at that, and that's not, in Mercado Libre in Latin America has seen a tremendous growth. In Asia, the powerhouses of Alibaba and JD and Pinduoduo the same. So when you, and even like the leagues, I would say like the number 2, number 3 companies in each one of the regions. I mean, Shopify, has done a fantastic year. So you have all these companies that have, got a huge boost, a lot of money, a lot of momentum, and they're not going to want to slow down. If anything, they're going to do everything they can to push it further. So, I think it's going to get really tough for brands that are not moving in the pace to just maintain that. And at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind also that like we all as consumers, we are very attracted by all the commercial aspect of the experience that we get, right? I mean, we buy online because of convenience or because of choice or because of price or because of access to product that we don't have usually. So you might want to go back to a store to live that physical experience and and see people and so on. I'll tell you, I mean, I live in Miami. In Miami, there is no COVID. We're already like a year ahead here. You go outside and there's no COVID. I can tell you it's full everywhere. But it doesn't change the fact that things like grocery has exploded, and you go now to Whole Food or to go to any of this chain, you see like the curbside pickup, and you see all these models that you were not seeing before to that extent. Instead of 2 Instacart parking lot, now you have 25, and they are full the 25. So, I think there are a couple of things like this that are not going to go back, and I think they're going to keep continuing. So I think what I would cautious is just to think that, yeah, it's not going to be that relevant. I think it's going to be even more relevant after COVID than it was before COVID, ultimately. So it should be just something that everybody is going after to make sure that they are well positioned on this. That's the big mistake that companies could be doing.
We do have something here from Leonardo. It's just a comment, really, mostly. But men are unusual animals. We already got used to e-commerce and miss outside activities. Therefore, I do see an increment on e-commerce in parallel to an increment in outside activities, i.e., restaurants, vacations, etc. So he's agreeing basically with everything we were saying. It was so funny, Nabil, that you said that Miami doesn't have COVID.
No, we COVID free here. I tell
COVID
you,
free. The whole state is COVID free.
Go to the bars, go to the restaurants. You're gonna see here. It's like the vaccine is already applied to everybody.
Incredible.
Happening over there. Okay, so let's continue. Guy, I have a question for you.
Yes.
How can you analyze your company to identify market opportunities? And what characteristics does a company need to check before enabling e-commerce?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it sort of builds upon what we've been talking about. I think first and foremost, if you, to Nabil's point, spot on, right? If you aren't looking at e-commerce and figuring out how it fits in your overall strategy today, you're already way behind, right? But I think to the point of what we have to look at is I think companies need to think about, again, what is, it's cliched, but start with the end in mind and come backwards, right? Where are their customers? What are their customers doing? Most of the customers today, to Nabil's point, what we're saying is we are all very accustomed and we are used to shopping through this digital medium. We're going to continue to do so. So if you need to think about that, regardless of what industry you're in, you're probably already behind. But now let's fast forward and say, all right, you haven't looked at e-commerce, or you're trying to add e-commerce. I think what you also have to do is you have to realize that once you open up that notion of being able to do e-commerce where people can interact with you digitally, you have to make sure that you can meet their demands, because now that fulfillment engine becomes very challenging. It's one thing if I just have one little store, it's, ghee.com hot sauce, and I sell hot sauce in my one little store, and I have people come in from the neighborhood to buy my hot sauces, and I know everybody, that's fantastic. And all of a sudden I say, you know what, I'm going to do this, I'm going to expand to e-commerce. And all of a sudden now I put a website up and people are starting to order my hot sauce. Well, guess what? Now I have to make sure I can package it properly. I can deliver it on time at a good, valuable cost where I'm not losing money, where the customer gets satisfaction when they get the hot sauce. It doesn't break, it shows up on time, it shows up in nice packaging. I've just added a whole layer of complexity to my business that I otherwise hadn't looked at. But if you're going to do that, you have to start understanding those details that go into it. It's not just simply putting something in a box and shipping it, right? There's a whole aspect. And then let's not even start talking, but we should talk about returns, right? All of a sudden, if I send that hot sauce out, they don't like it. Well, what do? Do I just refund them the money? Do I take it back? How do I take it back? How do I reslot it? So I think you really have to think about all these aspects. And to go back to what I started in the beginning of this conversation, what I think is really important is it's really that fulfillment aspect, right? It's really how do we fulfill those orders in a timely and cost-effective way that is the key to all of this. Capturing the order, in my opinion, has actually gotten pretty easy. There's plenty of tools out there to do order capture. It's really hard to make sure that I meet the customer's needs through my fulfillment engine. So I would say to anybody who's looking at that, really start thinking about that fulfillment aspect, as you're thinking about e-commerce.
Great, well said. Richard, what do you think about it?
So I've tried to look at this slightly differently again. So I've tried to look at it from like the business fundamentals. So if you're looking at your whether you're going to get into e-commerce as such, is really understanding your target market, testing that market, knowing your demographics as well. So with a lot of our customers, we've been, particularly those that are trying to enter the US market, and helping them to test that market, understanding where they are, what the profile is. I think that's that's an important aspect to understand target audience. If they're operating in different parts of the world, what are their pains and what the likely pains are going to they think they're going to find here operating in North America, and then choosing the products that are going to sell. So something that may sell in Europe and Middle East and China may not all equally sell here in the US. Creating that early marketing plan, and then also knowing your potential competition, or making sure that you understand competition. And then understanding how you're going to stock, how you're going to find those, those items that you're going to inventory, what supplies you're going to have. And I think one of the things, that Guy talked about as well is fulfillment. And are you going to try and, when you look at e-commerce, are you going to try and do this yourself? So in other words, are you going to try and manage all of these elements yourself, or you're going to find best of breed partners, or you're going to sort of like outsource and such, really. So I think and then that will depend on your speed to market. So if you're going to try and develop it internally and you're going to try and develop the skills and such, really, then it's going to take you much longer. But if you can find the right partners, then you maybe that speed to market might be much more rapid. But then some people want to keep control as well. So it's going to be a balance between these things. But ultimately, there's a number of steps that you need to look at to see whether it's going to to enable e-commerce. So those are just some of the points that I thought would be worth sharing.
Thanks. I think it's all about knowing your customers, as you said, and delivering a wholesome experience.
Yeah.
Not just a transaction. What do you think, Nabil?
Yeah, I think I would agree with all the comments made. I think it's really a basic question, but I often like to start with this when we talk about companies that are very, very early on into the journey. I think it's extremely important to really know why you're doing it, right? Why are you going online? And you would think like, well, it's obvious, right? Everybody wants to sell online for the same reason, but it's not, right? I mean, there are in certain cases you see companies that are really in a risk of survival, right? Because they might see a huge shift of their consumer base towards online or towards new entrants, new companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. And in some cases, it's just part of their natural evolution. And they have a couple of their brands, they are evolving online, or they are moving into subscription models, so they are adjusting, So I think there's a significant element as to what is the main reason why you're going online in regards to your bigger strategy. And the second is, how are you going to do it in terms of like channels, right? Because many people say, well, we're online, we sell on marketplaces. And then you're like, oh, okay, but you don't have any data on your consumers. You don't know who is buying your product. Yeah, but we're fine with this. Okay, well, that might be the answer, of some companies, but this is certainly not a good sustainable approach, right? So I think understanding also from the perspective of your final consumers, what they are expecting, why they are buying themselves online, and so on, will really help to drive then further down what are the key decisions that you have to do. Which channel should you be selling on? Should you have your direct-to-consumer channel or not? Should you have direct fulfillment with hyper-fast type of service, or you could manage it through like a larger, distribution centers and more like nationwide type of fulfillment? What are the real companies that are competing with you in the space? And one big question is, how can you make money? Because a big topic, obviously, in e-commerce is the profitability aspect of it, because many organizations are selling online, but when it comes to bottom line, it's quite challenging. So I think these are a couple of the things that I think are important to take into consideration to make sure you're enabling your e-commerce in the right path.
Thanks, Nabil. Dan, do you want to continue with your next question?
Absolutely. I'm going to pick on Guy again, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
In your experience, Guy, what are some of the essential factors to be considered when you are planning to transform your company and enable e-commerce?
Well, the essential factors, I think A is with any technology, is what is your threshold or your tolerance for change, right? And technology in itself, whether it's e-commerce or automation and anything of that nature, is not a panacea. So I think first it's when you're looking at bringing in e-commerce or adding more e-commerce, or even whatever that might look like, it's really what is your organization's tolerance for that change, because it's going to change. There's change management involved. It's not just the technology. So I think that's the first part you have to look at. And I think second is, like everything, right? I think we probably all talk about this at some level in our jobs, is what's the measurement? What am I trying to achieve here? What are the goals? Is it to increase velocity of my product going out? Is it reaching new markets? Is it, I'll be honest, like I've spoken, a long time ago when I mentioned being in Forrester Research, like I certainly spoke with a lot of companies back then who honestly told me, well, we're doing e-commerce. And I was like, well, why? Well, our CEO read an article in the Wall Street Journal about Amazon, so we got to do it. And I was like, but your product has nothing to do with e-commerce. But oh no, we're going to do e-commerce. now fast forward, and I mentioned earlier, we all need to be thinking about it, but I think we still have to look at, what is our goal and how do we measure towards it? Like any investment in any technology, and especially in e-com, I think those are especially key. So I think those are the two big things I would look at. And then of course, like everything, you've got to drill down, work with your people, work with your systems, and back again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, figure out the logistics and fulfillment that go around it.
Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, so just following up on those points, I think another important factor is understanding the resources, skill sets you have within your company, because I think in order to make that transformation, or like any other transformation, clearly it's always going to be a challenge. But I think now with e-commerce, and as Nabil mentioned earlier as well, being able to remain profitable is equally going to be a fairly large challenge. So I think upskilling, educating, and making sure that digital programs and making sure that your workforce is really sort of engaged in that kind of new digital age, because every aspect of what you do in e-commerce has to you need to almost get to the point where you can automate as much as possible. So I think that the people, the automation and such is going to be equally key. I think also that we've talked a lot about the fulfillment centers and warehousing. I mean, I'm always a great believer of automation is great, and it's clearly the way forward, but equally it needs to work in tandem with people within fulfillment centers. So automation is great for certain things, but people are great for others. But those working in combination. So I think really trying to make sure that your whole workforce and your skills, and make that kind of part of the culture, and to really sort of push the organization forward. Because if you don't stretch yourself and you don't push yourself, then you're not going to reach those goals.
You mentioned profit and e-commerce earlier. How profitable is e-commerce when you consider especially reverse logistics, and what an earlier commentator, Tony Sciarrotta, said, there's a $460 billion industry in reverse logistics.
It's a big challenge. So when I first started doing returns in, say, retail and fashion companies, even just 12, 13 years ago, you would be at like 9, 11%. Now in that same sector, you're up to, and at that time, sometimes you could charge for returns. Now it's free returns, and you're anywhere upwards between 32 to 36% in some cases, and you're having to deal with the flexibility that we were talking about earlier. But I think that's a massive cost. So I think trying to reduce the level of returns, for example, is a massive opportunity, because that's just eating into the margins. And that's there's two ways of doing that. That's trying to make sure that people don't order as many of the same product at the same time, and then also trying to ensure that you're not adding too many costs back on that leg. And then also more of the younger consumers as well becoming much more environmentally conscious, and you've got that aspect as well. And how you deal and how you deal with that returns, those returns is going to be, they're going to watch that, carefully as well as part of your whole sort of, environmental program as well.
Well, we all know that e-commerce is is here and now, but again, is it a profitable business? There's packaging, there's shipping, there's returns, there's everybody touching it. I mean, is it something that a small company should consider? What do you think, Richard?
Oh, go ahead,
Richard.
Yeah, so I think you need to, but I think the way you're going to get profitable is by streamlining your processes and putting more into. I mean, we've talked about the automation fulfillment up, and it's across the board. So like digitizing and your marketing processes, your customer care processes as well. Bringing artificial intelligence into those elements as well. Bringing being able to do inquiries. So I think that more and more that we can automate as and bring efficiencies and actually streamline processes, then you're going to get into position to be profitable. But make no mistake, this is challenging. And it's one of the big obstacles is that everybody's keen to get into e-commerce and such, but you need to really stay ahead of the curve, and then making sure that your workforce is has got the tools and the skills, and particularly in digital and to really sort of force that change. But no, I think it's a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge for a lot of organizations. And then you've got the traditional bricks and mortar that have been trying to get into e-commerce, and you've seen the number of chapter 11s and liquidations in the last 12 months. I mean, a lot of it's been brought on by COVID, but equally they've been challenged in that e-commerce side.
Nabil, I'm sure you have a comment on that.
On the profitability, on the factor to change, on both. Yeah, so I think let's start maybe with the factor of change. I think for me there are two things that are very important. One is who, and the second is how, right? So the first thing I think when we talk about who is who's going to lead that, right? And you see many organizations that are creating an e-commerce area, for example, or department or whatever that might be. And it's probably the biggest mistake today, because it made sense a couple of years ago to do that when people really needed to be educated around online, and you needed some people to do internal selling around the importance of the channel and so on. And today, the only thing you're doing when you create an e-commerce area is creating silos, when actually consumers, what they are looking is for truly omni-channel experience. They don't. A customer will never look at the way a company is organized, to define, how they will buy and how they will return a product, right? So, so having a dedicated area that is apart from, for example, from traditional brick and mortar, I think is not the right approach. But you have to define who's going to be able to do it, and who also has the experience and the ability to do it, right? So you also see many organizations that take people that have never worked in e-commerce but work for the company for many years, and they put them in charge of e-commerce. And then you're like, okay, well, that's likely not going to really work. So I think you have to bring in the right people to be able to execute that. I think that's a big factor. And you have to define a group of people that is really going to be able to work alongside all the other areas of the business, right? Because even in fulfillment, even in logistics, in general, e-commerce is not a specific vertical, right? It's not like the life science industry or the technology industry that have specific standard that you really want to have people that have specific expertise. In e-commerce, the way you should be looking at it is more of an operating profile. So it's the way you actually service consumers, the fact that you have a lot of single pick, but it's really applying to all the industries. So you need to have people that really understand this and are able to work with all the areas of an organization to be driving that topic of e-commerce, and that have done it also in the past, and that are not just coming from an area. And the second thing of how, I think, which is a critical enabler is the, I think there are two things. One is systems, and systems, is for example, just the inventory management topic is such an important, element of like managing e-commerce channels across different way of operating. If you have stores, if you don't have stores, if you have distributors and so on, this can be a make or break. And the second thing around how is understanding really well what are the specific topics that are unique to e-commerce, right? I think Richard was talking about 32 to 36% of returns. If you're going to go tomorrow and start a fashion business in e-commerce online, you need to be aware of this. You need to factor that in your margins, because there's no way you're going to get to 10%, right? There are companies that have 10, 12% in lifestyle, but there are companies that exist for 40 years that have the same customers coming back. They know really well the sizes, they know really well the product, and you're not that company. There are only few companies that are like this. So when you know the rules of the games onto the how, so like from a system standpoint and expertise standpoint, I think this is very important. It's going to be helpful. And I think to the second thing, or the third thing around the profitability, look, most of the large e-commerce companies, they actually don't make money yet, right? But they don't make money not because they can't, it's just because they are highly focused today around growth, and they are reinvesting all their money into growth. If they wanted to make money, they could make money from one week to the other. All the large companies, they could make way more money by tightening a bit the return policies, doing a couple of things that they are doing today, maybe a bit on a different way. But they are not doing it because, of course, there is this race for market share at this point. But there is a way to make money. And obviously, it's everything that Richard mentioned around processes and efficiencies and so on. But the other thing is, you should never compare your business model, especially if you're a company that is going through the shift and going towards multi-channel, you should never compare your logistic cost and your way of operating of a brick and mortar business to an e-commerce business. If you're going to start to look at how do you make money, you have to make a couple of shifts around marketing budgets, around profitability in terms of like margins into product, in terms of bundle. We start to see some companies that are really doing really intelligent way of operating, that they are, for example, incentivizing a slow deliveries, right, for sustainability purpose, or for grouping orders. They are optimizing their returns through consolidation points. So if you try to go head to head with Amazon, nobody's going to make money. I mean, it's pretty simple, right? It's like if you're trying to go and do that same type of experience, it's impossible you're going to make money. Even Walmart will not make money. Even with their scale, they're not going to make money. So let alone if you're a small company. So what you have to think about is, for me to make money, I'm not going to go head to head in terms of service level and all the dimension that you can get from Amazon. You should look at what are the things that you can do different that will actually bring a differentiator to your business, as well as will help significantly on the profitability aspect. And there are many things that are happening. We see a lot of things, particularly around the sustainability topics. We see a lot of companies that are actually able to manage being more sustainable, winning new consumer base, and at the same time make way more money out of the business because they're doing it on a better way.
Great points, Guy. I'm going to let you finish this because I'm sure you have additional thoughts to finish this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what was just said was spot on. All of the other, I certainly think that, like anything in business, right? Profitability doesn't naturally come out of the blue, right? You got to work for it. To Richard's point, you have to have the systems in place and the processes to make sure to understand it, to measure. To Nabil's point, spot on. Like, don't measure yourself against some of the big players. I think there's a fantastic number a couple of years ago I saw about the amount of money like Amazon spends on fulfillment, which is in the billions. Most companies, if not no company other than Amazon, has that kind of sort of disposable income at their mercy that they can just spend to get this working. But you also, to everything that was said, right? I think you have to look at this as part of your overall business of how you are going to satisfy your customer, and therefore, what are the things and the systems in place that make that happen? What are the measures? And to Nabil's point too, like, measure yourself against what you think makes the most sense. Don't measure yourself against the Joneses, so to speak, right? It's not keeping up with the Joneses, it's keeping up with your business. But I do think, again, part of that is also we have to make sure that we continue to push forward. And one point that was made, which I think is absolutely key, is you cannot separate this from the rest of your business. There cannot be I have my in-store fulfillment inventory process, I have my online e-commerce, right? I saw this, again, going back to my days at Forrester, I remember seeing this with some retailers. Said, well, this e-commerce group over here will run e-commerce and they're separate and they're kind of cool and they have their own systems, but our brick and mortar is still carrying the day. And what happened? All of a sudden they realized, wait, we as customers don't care, right? We as customers want the experience with the brand. And oh, by the way, that inventory is the same, whether it's going to e-commerce channel or brick and mortar, it's still that one widget. How do I manipulate it and use it better across all channels? So I think that's the other thing too. To be profitable, you have to make sure that you're looking across the system, across your entire network, across your entire business, not silo these, because I think Nabil would say this too, like if you silo them, then maybe, hey, e-commerce is doing really well, but my overall business stinks, right? What happened? I think a couple of years ago, I remember reading an article in the journal about the CFO, I think it was of Saks, who said, my business last year revenue was great, but my margins got clobbered. Well, why? Because his e-commerce business, he was managing it separately, and all of a sudden his cost of fulfillment went through the roof, so it destroyed his margins, right? You have to look at it holistically. And I think that's the key part to all this, right? The whole notion of e-commerce, it's here, it's living with us, it will be with us forever. It is part of our lives. But as a business, it has to be part of your overall strategy and vision, not this sort of separate project you're putting on the side and we'll get to it down the road, right? We didn't talk about it too, but I think stuff like security and things like that have to be part of that as well, because otherwise you're going to find cost will creep up where you don't see it, inefficiencies, all those aspects, and then the e-commerce side becomes not profitable, but it's really your business that's not becoming profitable.
Very good point. Do you think Walmart's making a good run at Amazon, though? Are they being successful or unsuccessful? I mean, at one point, they were charging for returns. I mean, they were making it less likely to do business with them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they're making a good run on it. I don't know. I see Nabil laugh, but I think Walmart has the heft to do it. I think you're going to look at, I look at folks out of, Nabil mentioned them, Alibaba, Tencent, folks like that as well. I think what's going to be interesting with the Walmart is I look at the Walmart as a network, right? What does the Walmart fulfillment network look like? Will they start attracting third-party folks who leverage the Walmart infrastructure to do their own fulfillment? I could see the same thing happening with other pockets, if you will. Target, Kohl's, others like that who might have their own little fulfillment clusters. But hey, Amazon is the giant. We all know, but we also know that they have a lot of different businesses. So let's be careful to see where the revenue is being generated from, from Amazon. Is it all from retail side or is probably from the AWS side?
Thank you. Sharon, you're next.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have covered this question with the challenges about returns, infrastructure, profit, inventory, fulfillment. But just to elaborate a little bit more, Richard, what do you think are some of the advantages and disadvantages of e-commerce as a business model?
All right. I'll probably start off. We've talked a lot about the advantages of e-commerce, so maybe I'll just start off with some of the disadvantages first, and then just in keeping down, I'll probably use the example of my daughters again in terms of as a very small sample as a way of understanding some of the challenges, but. E-commerce is, so in terms of disadvantage, say it's highly competitive. I've seen less brand loyalty, and again through the eyes of my children and their friends, they seem to be they can switch quite quickly, and they can be influenced by influencers, particularly on platforms like TikTok. So I think they also have the ability to be able to switch. If they don't get the experience they want, they can just switch basically very quickly, and that could be something as simple as the time it takes to to load up images, or it could be that the sizes. It could be a whole host of things. So I think definitely the competitiveness is a big disadvantage. The next one I would suggest really is not being able to try or be able to to touch that product. I know there's a lot of technology that's being developed, and a lot of websites are providing that kind of interactive experience, but I still see that as a really sort of a big challenge for for e-commerce. I know it's getting there, but I do see that, and that's why you're getting these multiple orders for for single products. I think with today's generation, there's definitely a level of impatience that makes it a little bit more challenging. So if you went into a store and you want to ask that salesperson, you could actually ask them. When you're in that kind of virtual environment, your choice in being able to answer questions can be, it could take, it could take longer. You could email somebody, you could send a chat and such. You don't always get the answers that you want, or they've used an element of automation and you get standard answers back. So I think impatience is another one that gives you a bit of a disadvantage. Shipping times. So, particularly here in North America and other regions, again, look at my daughters, they like switching between the different brands, and some of them are fulfilled out of Europe, some of them are fulfilled out of China, and they've been used to kind of the Amazon where it arrives in a couple of days or the next day, and all of a sudden they're having 3, 4, 5 days, and maybe not the whole track and trace available that they're used to on Amazon. So I think shipping times can be a little bit lengthy, so that can be a disadvantage, and I think ultimately, we touched on it a bit earlier, but there's still there's still a desire to go to, to stores, and I think they need to reinvent themselves and need to think about their, their purpose. But I think that, physical stores still have a place to play. So those are some of the disadvantages. The advantages we've covered, a lot through this, through this debate. But obviously, you've got 24/7 revenue. So basically, you're online all the time. You're not dictated by store hours. It's easier to encourage that kind of impulse buying. You can do flash sales as well. You can do target marketing. You've got all of the data and all of the information that you need to be able to sort of tailor. You can do personalization. You can fulfill a lot of big orders as well. You can scale the business quickly as well. So there's clearly a lot of advantages in terms of e-commerce. But I just want to dwell a little bit more on some of the disadvantages there, Sharon.
Thanks, Richard. Guy, do you have something to add to Richard's answer?
Yeah, no, I think what Richard said is spot on. I think the one that I would point to too is I think that notion of the personalization of service, and I think that's something that e-commerce, as much as we try by using data and making it very personalized, it becomes very personalized in terms of the inventory we put in front of you. It doesn't personalize the service. So I think that's one disadvantage where you don't have that intimacy you could have with your end customer. And to be honest, like for certain products, that's okay. If I'm buying tissues, it's Kleenex. Do I want the box with the blue or the box with the green? It doesn't really matter. But I will say, like, there's some companies I've talked to, like luxury brands. So for example, I talked to Louis Vuitton a couple of years ago, and they do a very small percentage of e-commerce, but they understood that they had to do some. And what they were telling me was, part of buying a Louis Vuitton handbag, if you're going to spend $5,000 on it, you don't just want it to show up at your front stoop in a box and you open it and there it is. So they understood part of it was that personalization, that service, and they were going to do their own literal white glove delivery because they understood that when you come to the store, there's a lot of personalized service. They serve you champagne and they dote on you. They wanted to figure out how could they replicate that in a fulfillment model that was not done within the store. And I think that's going to be the challenge where that negative aspect is, as I mentioned earlier, right? I don't control the way my brand's represented. If I use a third-party carrier to deliver my product, if that delivery person is rude or just throws the product onto the stoop or what have you, that's going to affect my brand, but I had no control over it. And I think that's one negative where you've given up a little bit of control of that personalization, of the ability to control your brand message to the end customer.
That's a good one. Thank you, Guy. What do you think, Nabil? Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I agree also with everything that was mentioned. I think there are maybe two things that I would like to add. I think let's start with the advantages. I think number one is you can really get to anyone, right? I mean, anybody can buy today and get access to different products that before they didn't have. And maybe for people that live in the US or in Europe, we don't feel it that much, but there are many places in the world where it's really opening a lot of opportunity for people to actually get access to wider range of products, which I think is really good. And the second thing is, and yeah, I think Shopify is definitely the big sponsor of this, is the ability for anyone to create a blockbuster brand, right? I mean, we're seeing examples of people that, create cosmetic companies that are disrupting, L'Oreal and Estee Lauder and companies that are multi-billion dollars out of their garage. And I just love this. I think this is really great. If we see what happened with the masks and the Etsy platform as an example, also during the pandemic, I think this empowerment of micro entrepreneurs across the globe, being able to create brands, create products, we start to see now a lot of brands that are way more sustainable, for example, in the cosmetic space, and people creating new business models, right? Subscription models, you name it, right? I think this is really good. I think that's a big advantage of online sales, that even smaller organization can really compete at large scale. And I think on the disadvantage is really down to two things, right? One is complex. So any video that you watch on YouTube that a guy tells you, yeah, I'm going to show you how to drop ship and make 3-digit, $100,000 in 3 weeks, just skip, right? I mean, this is the biggest BS that you can watch. Number one. And the second thing is it's volatile, right? I mean, it moves, I think, to Richard and Guy's point also, they mentioned it, is, there's a lot of volatility on consumer retention, also on trends, and it's hard to stay at the top, right? So So that's just also a reality of the space.
Thank you, Nabil.
Okay. Any further comments, guys, on that? Okay, let's go. I'm going to pick on Nabil again, actually. In your experience,
just not the Walmart question, because I'm not going to be able to say my true opinion. As long as you don't ask that.
No worries. But Nabil, in your experience, what kind of challenges will a company encounter once they decide to give e-commerce a try?
Yeah, so I think there are maybe three things, and we talked a bit about some of them to a certain level. But number one, I think the biggest challenge is the mindset that you will find in many organizations around e-commerce as a business, right? Meaning, when you go to very successful organizations that have evolved through distribution channels, through different models or more traditional models, and they are doing really good, and you go and you tell them, hey, look, there is this e-commerce trend here, you should really be like looking into this, and they tell you, well, yeah, we do e-commerce, but it's 2% of our sales, right? 3%. Like, why would we invest a lot of money, effort, people on this when it's really a low percentage of our total business and impact, right? So I think one of the big challenges is looking at the past to try to predict the future. I think, and you see this a lot, and you see also a lot of organizations that have realized that they really needed to do something different. I mean, probably one of the best examples is IKEA, right? Which had like an amazing model in store that took a long time for the company really to say, yes, this experience is amazing, but we also have to go online, right? And then when they really push that, then they acquired TaskRabbit, and now they're doing a lot of great things to move further. But looking at that, I think it's a big topic around the mindset, right? And trying to avoid falling into like, oh, it has worked really well in the past. Why would we change? The second thing I think is a big challenge is to compare your organization to Amazon. I think it's the biggest mistake that I see, the biggest by far. And my personal take on this is that, except if you're an organization that is willing to not make money for the next 20, 25 years, and that if you're a stock traded company, if you're a public company, that your investors are going to be okay with that, just let's stop the conversation there, right? Let's take another example, right? Let's take another example. Let's not talk about that, because you're not going to be able to execute towards the reality of execution in that space. So I think that's also a big thing. People should be looking really at how they can leverage their strength. It might be their brands, might be their identity, might be their cultural connection to their customers, ethics, values, sustainability, whatever that might be. But I think it's a big mistake to do that. And the third thing is, I think this is a long-term play, right? So the big challenge you see is also like companies that are looking at this on a quarterly basis or on a yearly basis. There's so much news. If you look at last year and Q1 this year, coverage about Target. Target is probably the best example of preparation and hard work beat everything else, right? They've been working on their journey for 10 years, right? And today they are probably the organization that has done the best job at going omni-channel from that category of companies, right? But it took them a long time. I mean, they are working, they did a couple of big acquisitions, they developed their technology, they integrated their store with their online. I mean, there's a lot there that is not done overnight, particularly at that scale. But when the moment hits, then you are extremely well positioned, and like you're literally like getting out of the pack and beating everybody else in the game. And I think that's something that you see it a lot, right? With the successful companies, they are really going after the long term. And the big challenge is if you don't have the ability to be working towards that, it's going to be really hard, right? You have to be prepared for that.
Okay, thank you, Nabil. Any quick comments from Richard or Guy in essence of time here?
I mean, the only thing I would just add, I mean, he answered it pretty fully. Consumer behavior is constantly changing. So I think that, you might have set and decide to go and try e-commerce, but, and you've done all your research and you've identified your customer base and everything else, but it changes very, particularly quickly. So I think that that's a big challenge and a constant challenge. The other one is, all around your fulfillment and delays in fulfillment and how you've set that up. Again, another one we've talked about earlier, the growth and returns and the cost of that is, and then the constant, sway and change in technology as well. So I think all of those things together, can be challenging when you decide to go and try e-commerce.
Quick comment on that.
Yeah, spot on. I think the one big thing too, and I think everybody touched upon it, but is setting customer expectations. As Nabil said, like don't measure yourself against others in terms of, let's call it Amazon, but make sure you communicate with your customer exactly what she should expect from the e-commerce activity, and manage to that. And I think what you'll find is most consumers, they're intelligent, they get it, right? They know that, they air quotes expect 2-hour delivery, 2-day delivery, maybe not. Maybe if you when you set the expectation and communicate properly, and you meet what you tell them, they'll be okay with that. I don't think we all need to get everything in 2 hours, but I think we need to get it when we expect to get it. And I think that's the challenge when you go to e-commerce, to make sure that you can set those expectations, meet those expectations, but constantly communicate with your consumer what those are.
Thank you, Guy. Guys, we have one more question and Sharon's going to ask. And if you don't mind, we're going to make this pretty quick. We got about 4 minutes to answer this question. So Sharon, take it away.
Okay, what is my best? In your perspective, Nabil, how do you see the future of our industry and what tips can you give to our audience so they can take advantage of this market opportunity?
So I think Richard mentioned it at the beginning in one of the comments. I believe it's the biggest thing that's going to happen for the next 10 years in supply chains. I think this is the biggest opportunity. I think in terms of tips, I don't know that I really have like a specific list of tips, but one thing that I do, I think that I believe very important is this is such a fast pace, a change and movement that every week you get surprised by some news or by something that is happening. So I think being really deep into understanding, going deep into learning, it's a constant learning process. I mean, on my side, that's what I do day and night, within my job. But even like this, I realize every day that I know very little of all the things that are happening in the space. And I think the main thing is really to try to keep learning, because it's going to move a lot still. There is no any saturation. There is nobody that has figured it out all. And it's going to keep moving because consumers are moving and changing. And when you look at like a couple of the examples that were talked about, like returns as a whole, that's as such is still a huge opportunity ahead. There's so much that is not yet uncovered. Subscription model, second-hand, or e-commerce, or refurbishing of product. I mean, there are like so many things that are happening on the online space that there will be like a sequence of opportunities being created one behind the other that I think every company can take advantage of. But of course, you just have to try to focus and go after a couple of things, because we talk about e-commerce, but e-commerce is such a wide topic, which I think the last point is just like to try to really go after one area and become the best at that area.
Thank you. Guy?
Yeah, I think Nabil said it great. I think it's everything's moving so quickly. And the reality is, I think one thing that people need to do looking forward is don't expect a return to the air quotes again, new normal. I think I've beaten this dead horse this time, but I think the reality is, what was the normal before, right? If you go back before COVID, if you go before that, well, e-commerce started, and all of a sudden, and before that, it was big malls and all this, right? We were always constantly changing the way we shop, the way consumers behave. So realize that the speed and the pace of change will continue. But I think one of the points Nabil made about Target is spot on too, but have that long-term plan in place to understand flexibility is key, right? Being able to respond to these changes is key. What are the things you put in place today to allow your organization to be flexible and be responsive? How are you being able to put and lay down the foundation, whether it's digitization, whether it's different types of warehouses, whether it's automation, What is the security? How are you able to collect information and point of sale, all those things? How are you able to fulfill, right? You have to be flexible. And I think that's the key part. I think that anybody out there, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of how mature you are with e-commerce, that you have to constantly be looking at is, how can I make sure that I'm flexible? Because let's face it, you go backwards about a year and a few weeks ago, who would ever have thought what we just went through this past year would have happened, right? And who knows what's going to happen moving forward. So I think those are the keys. And I think the last one I would say to everybody too is, technology is absolutely a vital tool in all this, but it is not a panacea. It is not a panacea. Just because, and I work for an automation company, I think automation is fantastic, but don't take on automation for the sake of it. Understand why you're taking it on, just like any other technology. So I think for supply chains, e-commerce, and all that moving forward, I think those are the lessons I would tell people to keep in mind as you go forward.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And sometimes life is not about protocols and processes. Sometimes it's about analyzing the environment to be fast and react according to the current needs. So I totally agree with you. Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think the best advice really has been said, really, is to keep learning. Read articles, watch videos, listen to podcasts, participate in events like we're doing today, and try and consume as much information as you can in the field of e-commerce, because that's the only way you're going to be able to just keep up, and be and be able to share that within your organization, but also to give you an edge as you look to to try and compete. So I definitely think that learning is paramount above anything. In terms of some trends, I think the global secondary market is definitely a big trend to watch out for. I definitely think the environmentally conscious shopper is another one that we'll see more, and that'll play into it. Definitely think video and customer experience is going to be much more prevalent as well, and we're starting to see that the smart shopper, and then probably that kind of interactive experience is going to become, we're going to see more of that, which will hopefully reduce the number of orders that are ordered, for the same item. But yeah, very exciting. This, e-commerce is it's a brilliant area to be in. It's going to be with us for a long time, and there's no better place to be.
Very exciting time. You're absolutely right, gentlemen. And let me just say thank you so much, guys. It's always a pleasure having you guys on board with us during our logistics sessions. Very well done. Very well said. Your points are excellent. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Dan, Sharon.
Thank you, Dan.
It's a pleasure. Cheers. Thank you, everybody.